Please welcome on stage the co-director of the film you just saw, Lucas van der Hey. Lucas. How do you feel?
I cried a lot. Yeah.
Because it's the first time you're screening the film in front of an audience.
Yeah, it felt for me like that I saw the film for the first time, actually. And you know, production process can sometimes be so stressy that we had a premiere last year and I wasn't there. I was like on a cloud in Amsterdam in the Eye in a huge film theater. And for me, it felt like, as I said, it felt like that I saw the movie for the first time, and not as a filmmaker, but as a queer person. And I love these people so badly.
Thank you so much for trusting the festival and giving us this international premiere. It's a huge honor. We have a few minutes to have a conversation before the round table. And like the obvious question that I'm going to ask you first is like, how did it all started? How did you heard about this camp? How did you thought about the film? You are co-director alongside Chris Westendorp. Thank you. Yeah. So how did you two jump on the project?
I started writing it like 3 years ago, like researching it, after I met Moos. And Moos is from a very progressive family in Amsterdam. And I grew up in a conservative Christian family. So for me, it was quite hard to come out as gay. And then I met Moos, and his mother is a screenwriter for movies, and his father is an actor. And a very progressive family, and Moos needed a summer camp like this. And then I was like, why does he need a summer camp like this if your parents were so progressive? And after that moment I met Moos, I realized that progression in a family can still be in a family, but in a society we have to make very big steps still and again. And I think that touched me the most, actually. I mean, the state of the world that we're in now, especially for queer people. Yeah, they are doing it. They are showing themselves, and Moos was showing himself. He had a transition after he went on the summer camp, and after it's like 5 days. It's like 4.5 days. The summer camp is quite short. So yeah, it started by Moos by telling a story about progressive parents and progressive kids. Yeah.
Yeah, because even though we have progressive families, we all grew up in a world that teach us how we should or should not be.
Yeah, definitely.
And that can be tough. How did you approach the protagonist? Because it's a really intimate film. I mean, the camera is really close to the protagonist, and it somehow disappears sometimes. How did you approach that to be able to give the kids some intimacy without voyeurism in the way you were filming?
Well, I want to stay away from the voyeurism part. I mean, it is voyeurism, but we, as filmmakers, we're very engaged. So we're very honest from the beginning, like what we need from you and what do you need from us. We want to tell you to tell the story, not us. That's why we didn't want to do interviews or talking heads. So they just decided what they were going to tell. And the structure of the camp is also very good for it, like share what you want to share. And yeah, so and I think it starts with the research, actually, and not just the research, but also about the energy of your crew. So I asked Chris, I went on research for like 3 times, and then I asked Chris because it was a lot to direct yourself on the summer camp with 70 queer kids. So then I decided I have to do it with another co-director. And Chris is very sweet, and I think it starts with her energy and my energy and the energy of the cinematographers who were queer, the sound people who were queer. So for us, it was very important that we had to tell a story too. So we jumped in the conversations as well, told our stories. Could also be a movie structure, but we didn't do that. But yeah, so.
Yeah, because I was about to say, as a queer person yourself, it was your first queer camp as well.
Yeah, this was my third queer camp actually.
Okay, yeah.
But the first queer camp was actually, I was joining the crew as a crew lead, as a researcher, and it started by a field full of parents with their kids, and it was like 115 people or something. Moms, dads, mostly moms. We have an issue with dads though. Masculinity, different topic. But that touched me so hard that it was a field full of parents who supported their kids, who supported their child to go on a summer camp for queer kids who struggled a lot, most of them. So for me, there was a starting point in the reasons that was like, okay, this is a story that we need to tell.
And during the camp, what struck you the most on what happened during these 5 days? What were you expecting? What you got at the end in the film?
I was doing the research the second year with Chris, and on the second day I was like, holy shit, I feel so ashamed that I brought you into this camp. Nothing is gonna happen. And but the camp, the people from the camp, the teachers told me that you have to trust the process of the kids. They still need to find the other ones, and then they will open up to each other. And I think that was the most important lesson for me, that some things take time, especially when it's like 5 days. The kids are scared and vulnerable, and yeah, by giving them time, it's a lot of stuff is happening, and I think that's not just for that topic, but for a lot of decisions you make as a filmmaker.
We're going to have a conversation on adult domination, and it's quite striking now how all the discourse we have here on queer youth. And I was wondering how the young people that you filmed perceive the way adults talk about them and them in society. How does this discourse affect them in their everyday life?
Well, I think the first adults they met are their parents, and as a parent, it all starts with the parents, I guess. And as a parent, especially for these kids in the movie, you do have two choices: like, are you behind your kid, or are you denying your kid for who they are, or for who they want to be? And I think that decision is up to the parents. And for the kids, it's like you have to show yourself to the world, and hopefully your parents or the rest of the world will come. But I think that they learned that lesson in camp, and that they are facing that struggle every day. Like, can I be myself in this room, or can I be myself in this home? Yeah.
It's actually a very powerful piece and very a timely film, I'd say. It's a good moment to have this kind of conversation. I think we're gonna jump onto the round table, but you're gonna stay in the room. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions from the audience to you, but you're gonna be with us inside the room. So if you have questions for Lucas at the end of the panel discussion, feel free to ask. Lucas will be around. So we're gonna jump a bit deeper in the conversation on the power dynamics between youth and the adults with the panel. And so thank you very much, Lucas, for trusting us. Et voilà, et je laisse le plateau à Kaoutar Harchi et ses...
And I'll now give the floor to Kaoutar Harchi and her guests.
Bonjour tout le monde. Sans transition.
Good day to all. With no transition, pretty much, we're going to continue the discussion further to this wonderful and very moving film that we've all just seen.
Carolina Gonzalez.
Carolina Gonzalez, you're an
Vous êtes
activist and you are a video maker, and you also created
un parcours qui a été longuement
a
centré
podcast, and you have a YouTube channel, and you've worked on violence, and in particular the fact that violence is often related to the relation between parents and their children. Thank you for being here.
Pierre Niedergang.
Pierre Niedergang, you're a doctor in philosophy, you teach philosophy, and you're the author of Vers la normativité queer, a book that was published in 2023 by Blas, the publisher, and you've worked with many other researchers on promoting the works of Peter Wolmarks. Thank you for your presence here.
Gabrielle Richard. Merci.
Gabrielle Richard, thank you and good day. You're a sociologist and you head research at GRIS-Montréal. You've written 2 books, Faire famille autrement, published in 2022, and Protéger nos enfants in 2024. And the publisher was Binge. Thank you for being here.
Et Karine Espineira, qui est
And Karine Espineira, she's with us online. Thank you for being here.
Bonsoir, bonjour. Et vous êtes
She's a sociologist and wrote Transidentité and Transitude, se défaire des idées reçues. This was published in 2022, and the publisher was Le Cavalier Bleu. Thank you very much, Karine.
Je disais effectivement
So I was saying, with no transition, because it is through the film that was very beautiful and very moving by Lucas van der Rie that we will start our discussion. The first question I wanted to ask you was how did you perceive the film and what did it mean to you in relation to the work that you are carrying out? Who would like to start? Carolina. I've just seen it for the first time, and what struck me was the importance for populations such as these to have a space to create social links, spaces that are created to be able to explore other ways of existing in the world than the ones that are imposed on it. And the link with my work is, well, it's a little similar to what I tried to do 10 years ago when I launched my YouTube channel. Time flies by. So I was trying to express myself further to my own experiences, and people that I knew well or a little less well started following me. So I think these spaces are very important, and it's also a matter of protecting the intimacy. And I don't know where I can speak about anonymity, but I think it's important to be able to be who you are. And one of the people in the film was told, you can go home at any time. You don't have to accelerate the process. I think that was great. I would like to speak of the importance of the community, of things in common. Often we speak of the LGBTQI+ community, and it's doubtful that the community exists. And I found that what was wonderful here was to see how important it is to build something in common and to build that by meeting up. These people were washing the dishes together, doing sports together, they exchange experiences, and the film really showed things in common being built. The producer said that it takes time, and that's a very strong message too. And it's true, because these people didn't know each other. They didn't have a common identity that was there already, that pre-existed. No, what is common has to be created, built up, and that can only happen in very specific spaces. And I found it interesting to see, well, we're here talking about adult domination and dominations in general, but the people who organized the camp told, I think the name was Fano, is that right? But they told him that he could stay or leave as he wished. But actually, and we'll come back to this later, his mum said, no, that's absolutely out of the question. There's no way I'm coming to pick you up. So the people from the camp were telling him he could leave whenever he wanted. But the mother, the person from the family, said, no, I've got the car, you don't drive. And that's what she decided. So this is all related to what you experience when you're a kid, when you're young, and you see that there is a paradox there and there's a tension. You see that quite quickly in the film. Yes, and in line with that, what I find interesting is that we're here to speak about adult domination, but this film shows us the other side of adult domination. So I'm not saying that you don't see from time to time that adult domination appear, but we are in a context where certain representations are privileged. You rarely see adults, even the adults that are in charge of the camp, mainly voices and not so much people who appear on the screen. The camera stays focused on the younger people, which is kind of rare. And then we're outside of the family context. So here it was a little specific, as Lucas explained earlier on. This is an audience that, these young people generally benefit from the support of their family and peers, and that's kind of unusual in the queer world. And then, well, everything is not perfect, but you have a representation of young queer people who are happy, not all the time, but this is something that you don't often see. You rarely see happy young queer people. Now, I'll tell you something which probably relates more to my world and my work more than anything else, so take it or leave it. But I've been working for a while with young queer people, young questioning people, young trans people, and one thing that has never changed in the 20-odd last years is that every time I try to go to get representations or images online and I type queer or trans, I always get the same image. It's a young person with a hood over their head, sort of crouching down in the school. I don't know whether you've seen the picture. The camera comes from this angle, and that is the typical image, typical photo of school bullying and school harassment. And so it's just to underscore what kind of images and photos we adults see and what photos these queer people have access to. And, well, I've almost finished now, but when we're talking about the political or sociological or media space for these people, it's generally from a victim point of view. We don't want to encourage other people to question their compulsory heterosexuality. So, yes, we often think of them, we have a representation in mind, but it's often suffering victims and so on. Or, and this is similar to a non-representation, it's when their words and messages are relayed by adults, and that's what we face. And what's very unusual with this film is that we're not in a context where it's the adults who are telling the story or getting the messages across of the young ones.
Karine, what are your views? How did that film sit with you? This really reflects my work because I work currently on what we call the backlash on the trans rhetoric, for example, which targets minors. And we see that often this comes from parents. In my personal viewpoint, Sometimes I had a kind of knot in my stomach and I felt really emotional because I can imagine being at that age. I wanted to speak to Karine, who is 14, 15, 16 years old, and go and say, seek out these places, seek out these tools so that your parents can support you, so that your parents also have to grow up, because it really, truly affected me on a very personal level. And of course, I want to share this feeling with you. And I was really struck by I was on the verge of tears when we were looking at this film. It's really interesting to see how can we go along a path where we're not going to be alone. So when people are crossing over the line, and to really shine a light on that. I'd also like to say what I really appreciated in the documentary. So here I'm talking about the people who detract away from the LGBTQI+, but also in France, we often attack these areas. I was happy to see in this documentary that people who have to try and understand themselves, firstly. This is also understanding between themselves. And the aim of this is a way to live better in the world and to live with this life, and how we can get involved with this normality, if you like. Now, this is certainly a documentary which is certainly really, truly moved me, and I also feel it's going to be very useful. Thank you very much. By way of introduction, Robin Ade mentioned that when we talk about that notion of gender and racial domination or class domination as well, what comes to mind are some theoretical or conceptual elements which come to mind. Now, adult domination, which is the title of this roundtable, is Deconstructing Adult Domination. I would see that things are still a little bit blurred, if you like. Karine Espineira spoke about the detractors from the LGBTQIA+. Can we come back to this conception of adult domination? Can we try and understand a little bit more about what this means? Do you use it in your work? Do you use a different notion? How does this expression, adult domination, how does it echo with your respective areas of work? Pierre. I'm going to speak about the work of Tal Pedro Max, who helped me with this understanding of adult domination. He was really at the heart of a thesis which he was not able to finish because he killed himself in 2021. With a number of colleagues, we decided to work towards the publication of this thesis because we felt it was very important. And the title of this is The Forgotten Domination to Politicize the Adult-Child Relationships. To have another look at this because, for example, the movement, Fano's mother is forcing him to stay at the camp. We often think that it's natural for parents to make their children go through things for their well-being. But these are people who are not fully made up yet, or not fully complete, if you like, and their understanding is not truly formed, and we have to take the decision in their place. And the idea of talking about adult domination here is of the view that this is not a natural relationship. This is something that has been inferred politically by laws, by institutions, and that this vulnerability which is supposed to be from the children's side, it's not natural. This is a vulnerability which has been imposed politically, and domination is often criticized because another way of repoliticizing the question of childhood, for example, when we talk about adultism or ageism, for example. But when we talk about domination, it really gets into a framework which is the legacy of Marxism, materialism, when we have domination between two individuals, the adults and children. There is conflict, and a conflict which has its roots in class. When we talk about domination to adult and children, we also think about a antagonism between the children's class and the adult class. So this is something which is quite fertile ground to allow us to rethink the relationship which stems from this adult domination. This also causes some real specific issues as well. In the case of the relationship between adult and children, if we're lucky enough, then we move from a move of being dominated by as a child and being someone who would dominate as well. So this is, I might become someone who dominates at some point. So this is a very kind of specific issue with this adult-child relationship, because all of us at one time or another will become dominant in this particular relationship.
Dans la lignée de ce que Pierre vient de
Now, what Pierre has just spoken to, I'm a sociologist. I really try to struggle to understand this adult domination. So I said, what is it? What does it mean? And I discovered that there is a discourse that exists when we talk about adult domination, because for example, a 2-year-old child can't decide when he wants to go to bed, or he or she can't feed him or herself, or they have to take any medication. So a counter-argument, we're trying to say,
c'est qu'on veut interroger les conditions sociales de création des statuts mineurs.
We have to look at minor, children, adults. We have to put it into perspective. So in my exercise, when I was taking a step back to try and understand what we mean of this idea of domination, as these relationships of domination, so it's quite difficult to see this sometimes. And when we talk about domination, what I find useful, and I hope it might be useful for you as well, is to look at different exercises for diversion. For example, there is a comic author which is called "This is where we change perspectives." It's just a short book, or when. So we look at daily lives, but when we look at it through a different lens, and these are, I don't have these in front of me, but let me describe it. For example, you have a, say, for example, just for example, myself and Pierre as a couple. Pierre has a new car, and I say, Pierre, lend your car, you have to share it, don't be selfish, you have to share it with others. So there are obviously different types of scenarios, not just that one. An adult might forget to lend something to another adult without the permission, so that's consent. But then if you go to a playground, for example, if you're a parent or not, but very often, that's what we ask our children to do, if they're playing in the sandpit, lend, the spade or whatever to another child. Lend your car, you have to share your things. That's how we always have to live. But if we, that's what it's like as a child, but if we kind of turn the tables, if you like. So it's a series of kind of sketches which I think are quite effective to help us to understand what's behind this notion of adult domination and relationship between adults and children, because we also have to bear in mind the intersectionality. But when we talk about adult domination,
carrefour de l'adultisme et des questions d'hétérosexisme et de cissexisme en particulier.
So cissexism and heterosexism as well. But if we look at these, we cannot view children and minors as whether it's boys or girls or binary, so people who are discriminated against. So there's so many different variables that we have to consider.
Dans des cas qui font l'actualité, des cas de violence policière envers des jeunes personnes racisées.
For example, there's police violence against young people. And also, when these minors
Il avait l'apparence d'un homme.
might be 12 years old, but might look a lot older. So rather than making these minors innocent, there's the opposite, to try and make them apply adult notions to them. And I think it was important to underscore that there. It's also, that's quite interesting, that distinction that you mentioned. Karine, how do you approach this concept of adult domination? Because I think that this is a very interesting way, because you can look at it in many different ways. When we talk about adult domination, so power is what comes to mind between adult and child, and between genders, between transsexuals, for example. But this is really between adult and children, and this issue of power, where the child is considered a kind of blank page that has to be filled out. Now, why do I talk about this blank page that has to be filled out? When we think about a child, parents talk about children like, one day you'll be able to do it. You'll be, when you're older, be able to do this. When you're at an age when you can understand, when you'll be married, when you have your own children, you will then understand, etc., etc. So it's always a type of kind of future that it's as if they're not there. But whilst they are there, but their autonomy, their way to think about things is one day in the future. This idea of this blank page, which I think is a very strong image, I do feel it's terrible, but I think there really are people who truly think like that. I might be a bit blunt here, but all the discourse on trans minors, for example, and different collectives of parents, for example. So, who have very conservative or ultra-conservative ideas, we still can hear that the adults rather have all the cards and have to fill out this blank page before we even have any discussions about trans activism, or LGBTQIA+ does so and fills out that page for them. And that is why, that's why I said it's a super interesting topic, as I mentioned earlier. Now, I began posting videos at 18 years old, and alongside this, I undertook studies in sociology, and I also work in schools, and I was really struck by the memories of the canteen, of how adults spoke to the children, because as I was really surprised by the way how adults spoke to children and said, but this takes me back to that memory of how they spoke to the children in the canteen. In my professional and daily life, there really has been a sharp light cast on the class reports and the relationships, rather, gender relationships, and because I've also worked in all different areas to try and understand. But with children, it was really obvious. Everything's there. Everything that we make other people suffer, we can see all of this in the lives of children. This is where we have to say repression of the mind and the body, and the child might be kind of a deviant from nature, and that they have to send them through different institutions, for example, through school. And it felt this was like a light bulb went off, because I saw that in my practice, I didn't have tools to use for some kind of repression that I was using, really, for lack of a better term. So a link that I saw, so almost where we had a tree and the different branches were sexism and domination, for example, that everything we're aware of adults, but the very trunk of this tree is the domination of adults towards children. And all of us, we've all been children, of course. This was a real gateway for me. That's how I wanted to address this issue of adult domination towards children, because when I was a child, I felt I had a view, I should be listened and protected, and this is what we've all lived through. And perhaps I was reminded of the kind of child that I was. Also, adult domination in terms of statistics, for example, if we look from this as a feminist lens, also violence that's inflicted against children, because often women are victims of sexual violence and domestic violence. Also, children are victims. The statistics are from the General Office of Statistics and the Support and Prevention Office to support women and domestic children. And most of the children are below 14 years old. I don't have the exact statistics in front of me, but I'll let you have a look online. At least one child out of 10 has suffered in this way. Between 2013 to 2016, the perpetrators of these types of crimes were minors. About a quarter of the perpetrators of these sexual violence crimes are themselves children. So these figures have gone down by 15% in 2022, but the figures are still quite alarming. In 2023, we see that the case of ill treatment towards children in 3/4 of cases came from a member of the family, whether in the extended family. But the family can be a dangerous institution when it comes to violence, domestic violence. I've almost come to an end. In 2022, too, about almost 2,000 children were hospitalized in Switzerland they were endangered, their well-being was endangered. About 45% of these were under 6 years old. They were talking about children here, and like babies were hospitalized. And that is adult domination in a nutshell, because it's not normal, of course, that groups should suffer, but with children, this is even more magnified.
d'entre eux, cette violence, ils s'en imprègnent comme des éponges et après ils
So children soak up what they see, and this violence that they see at home, and the effects are devastating. And adults reply, oh, you know, young people nowadays, things are getting worse and worse, because TikTok, internet, for example. But it's an absolute reflection. They're looking in the mirror themselves about what had happened.
Ça renvoie à la question de la prise de conscience.
And this sends us back to the question of awareness as dominator in this relationship. So we have the figures, and I think that that is useful, and the fact that you were in contact with these children, you were able to observe, but it's not that easy because becoming dominant and making that natural means forgetting that we ourselves have been subjected to violence when we were children. And the author here suggests that we should carry out an exercise in which we don't look at ourselves in a positive light, me and my family, it was perfect and wonderful, but that we analyze them through the prisms of the political tools and what memories we have of violence or constraints and so on. Yeah, and just in line with what you've just said, I think it was last year or a couple of years ago, I can't remember, but I did a whole series on domestic violence that I'd been subjected to as a child and then as an adolescent and then as a young adult. So there's a whole series in the playlist, domestic violence. You can go and listen to it online, and one of the comments that I had most often were adults or parents who came and said, well, no, it didn't kill me. I had worse happen to me. I don't know why you're crying about this. And this is in line with what you were just saying, where these relationships, power relationships, actually turned into something normal. We think it wasn't that serious, and that's what's turned us into the person we are today. But unfortunately, that's not the case, and I see the results on a daily basis in my profession. Well, I like this because there's an oscillation between things that are related to queer and trans people and then this more wide-ranging adult domination. I just wanted to come back to the queer and trans aspect in current society. Karine, you briefly mentioned the people's general panic about social media and what people are exposed to, especially the youth is exposed to nowadays. I was able to, in the context of my work, interview some 80-odd people who were queer, trans, or questioning, and they spoke to me about their experiences in different ways. Some things were somewhat trite in a way, but they were important for them. And others were much more violent, sexual violence, and other types of violence as well. But I wanted to speak to you a little about what these kids and youth told me about. And this is also in line with what we saw in the film. Many queer and trans people that I met in my survey told me about the obstacles that they had to face in the coming out procedure. We know that it's a complex issue, that it's not one coming out, but several coming out throughout their lives, and they told me about being queer, trans, but also being a young person, and the fact that they were constantly surrounded by adults who wanted to have a say in how they did their coming out, how it had taken place. Many of them said, well, I'm able to talk about it, but not to my grandparents because they'd have cardiac arrest. I can't talk about it to my younger sister or brother because they're too young and it'll shock them. So it's, yes, you can be, but, and there's always a but. And then there's the, are you sure about this? And are you sure about yourself? And it's not only the younger people, but also adult queer and trans people. Often they hear themselves being told, well, yes, it's fine, but who are you to decide this? You're only X years old, and give yourself time, and have you really thought about it? But this young person may be thinking, but I'm an asexual person, and I am not interested in anything sexually related, and I know what I know about my person. That doesn't mean that I know exactly how I'm going to be or what I'm going to be for the rest of my life, but right now. But they are constantly being told, but wait, things will sort themselves out, things will change, you'll enjoy it. So there's this kind of denial, and above and beyond the coming out, there is this whole discourse about how these young people are not old enough to take on board their own orientation, or they hear themselves being told that they can't buy this or that. They told me, well, I wanted to go out and buy a cap, and I'm told that I shouldn't wear a cap. So they felt limited in their ability to explore their gender or confirm their gender by adults who could prevent them from going out or prevent them from meeting up with a given type of person because they are the ones who have the money. And all of this has an impact on who these people become. And in the film, there was one person who explained, well, I can't wait to have my top surgery, but I'm not allowed to have it for another 2 years. Why? Because of regulations and policies that are set up by adults. And we do speak about minors and underage trans and non-binary people, but in the media it is practically always without the voice of the main person concerned. It's the adults' voices who are heard, and we are the ones who think we know what is good and not good for this underage trans person. We don't give them the floor. We don't let them express themselves. I think we have a couple of minutes left before we open the floor for questions from the room. I'm going to ask you another very wide-ranging question, but I think it's very important in the context of this festival, and that's the link or the relations between these matters, childhood and families and LGBTQI plus youth, and the law. Now, talking about the law and people's rights, which is just one word in French, droit, it's not exactly the same thing, but how do you establish a link between all this, the rights of youth? We are in Geneva, after all. So,
pertinent à votre sens, ou en tout cas qui se prête à la question.
how do rights come into play here? Pierre, over to you.
Qui sont souvent des politiques qui sont présentes.
Regarding the policies are often presented as protective of children who are perceived as being vulnerable, and they therefore need to be protected, especially as they come from dysfunctional or what are explained or described as dysfunctional families. This vulnerability ultimately is one that is produced by the law. Being underage is a status in which you can't have your own money, you can't drive, you can't vote, you can't make decisions. Your body is well, there you go, and you're locked up in the family institution, and the child is made vulnerable by the legislation, by law and laws. And so we're told we need to protect children But we should challenge and ask ourselves what is making them vulnerable. And it is some laws and some institutions. You were talking about the institution of the family. The institution of the family is one of them. It's considered as the main cell on the basis of which everything is established, including the laws. But as you explained, the family is often a nest for violence, and violence against children is often and most often carried out within the family. So rather than protecting the children of the family, we should probably be protecting them from their families. Yes, and that makes me think of a class that I attended. I heard something that struck me and I've never forgotten. I was told the family is the most violent group in society after military units. That just gives you an idea of how violent families are, and it also makes us should make us think about violence in the couple. So you, as you said, protecting children and setting up these institutions, social protection institutions that need to be strengthened. I'm not saying that it's useless, but we should be looking at how we can prevent these violence acts from taking place, and guaranteeing that they are raised in a society where they know that they have mental and physical autonomy, that they have a right to self-determination, that they can explore horizons outside of the family cell. And it's not only what happens at home, it's what happens at school, it's what happens in their pastimes when they're studying music and when they're doing any kind of activity outside of the family. So they need to be thought about in all of these contexts. We can't analyze them only in a horizontal way. There are, of course, situations where adults and children are not the same, but we should be looking at them from different angles. Thank you. Karine? I'm going to distance myself a little from this and look at it from a different angle. I wanted to speak a little about procreation amongst trans people and youth. In the past, the transition took place very late in their lives. Then there was another generation that said, well, I'm going to give up on having a family. And now we have a generation in which they don't give up. They say, well, I want my transition and I want to have a family at the same time. Now, the authorities and the doctors in the second half of the 2000s were not really in favor of this. They said, well, excuse me, so you want to transition, but you want children on top of that, and you're very young, and who are you to decide? And there's an anthropologist who I would like to refer to. She explained that these doctors had kind of created a myth out of the family unit as we knew it. And obviously, when these trans people turned up, these things didn't match. Now, I'll come at it from a different angle now and say that when you have, let's take a young couple. One of the people in the couple is trans. So they are followed twice by a psychiatrist. First of all, because they want to go through transition, and a second time because they want a family. So it's like a double sentence, and that can't be. So in Belgium, this is not the case. There's no reason for somebody to go and see a psychiatrist just because they're trans. In American states, now I don't know what the situation is right now, given the climate over there, but in the 2010s, procreation is a constitutional right, which means that a trans person, if they go through their transition or not, they were told that they should conserve their gametes, and they were told, well, whatever happens, whether you go through with it or not, you will have taken measures necessary to be able to have children. Now, this is very different from what we have in France. And
les médecins, finalement, en sont arrivés à outrepasser
ultimately what happened is that the doctors
en place des outils qui pourtant relèvent
set up tools that are related to the laws. They decided on things that were going to control and limit those young people, those young trans people who wanted to have a family.
Gabrielle, en quelques secondes.
Oui, absolument.
Gabriella, in a couple of seconds. Yes, I've analyzed the situation from a legal point of view, yet from another angle, and think that we should possibly look into the right to exploration. Generally, we
Le développement humain comme une série.
Consider human development, a bit like Piaget, as different stages that need to be gone through. And this approach is based on adultism. Karine was talking earlier on about the white page, but we see young people who are incomplete, still to be built, and adults as people who are finished, they are accomplished. And the issue is that these young people are not allowed to live with their doubts. Basically, when you reach adulthood, you're supposed to know where you stand, to put things simply. It's so difficult to conceive or to think of these transitions that are started out in adulthood. This is not something that we are able to deal with mentally. We find it difficult to understand that these young people are experiencing all these doubts. So I think that we should be challenging our own way of understanding human development and look for a model that will enable us to better understand and take on board these errors, these attempts, these pauses, this backsliding. And we aren't in that situation right now.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Avant de vous céder bien volontiers la parole.
Right, before we hand over to you, and we really look forward to hearing your questions, I wanted to thank Robin Adé and the entire team of the festival who've made this co-presentation possible with the OPEJF, I apologize, which is a laboratory here in Geneva, the Observatoire des politiques de l'enfance, de la jeunesse et de la famille, working on childhood, youth, and families. And I would like to thank this observatory for having enabled this first partnership.
Une personne va circuler.
Now, somebody is going to be in the room with a microphone that they will make available to you if you have a question for our guests.
Le débat a été particulièrement dense. Il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont été dites.
The discussion was really dense. A lot of things were said, and I'm sure that you have comments. I know that it's always hard to be the first to take the floor, so we try to continue our chat as we await you. Thank you.
Je parle aussi en tant que personne, bon, je suis maintenant adulte.
I am now an adult.
En tant que personne adulte et jeune adulte.
So I'm speaking as a young queer adult, but I am also someone who has experienced violence, and I've experienced mental illness. That's not yet over, but we're getting there. And I'd like to know, as of when you consider, or how you consider.
J'ai plusieurs exemples qui me viennent en tête, je vais en citer un.
Well, but let me put this in examples. I have scars. I have self-mutilated and gone through self-harm, and I've had to, in fact, twice, I've had to explain things. Once, I explained things very clearly and directly. I asked the parents if I was able to, if I could explain this to their young daughter, and I was able to. She was very intelligent, she understood. Another time, I had a huge bandage around my arm, and I was asked what had happened, and I think I said, well, something along the lines of I was scratched by a witch, because I knew that the mother didn't want me to say anything about self-harm and didn't want to interfere with the way she was raising her children. Anyway, I'm sorry, I just wanted to share this with you. So I think it all relates to how these children are raised. And in terms of self-harm and me, when I was little, I didn't know exactly what self-harm was. I'd seen the traces on other people. I didn't know what it was. Now that I have scars, well, it's something that I'm living with, I've learned to live with, and I just wanted to share my experience with you. Have a nice day.
D'autres personnes qui souhaitent...
Would anybody else like to take the floor? I think there's someone there. The question.
Voilà, comme par hasard, là, il y en a plusieurs. OK.
Okay, there seem to be several. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this really interesting discussion this afternoon. What I would like to... Thinking about this adult-children relationship, I think that there is some legal framework which I don't think are very realistic. But how do you see this this relationship between adults and children? How does it? How do we move from being dominated over to becoming someone who dominates? I'll just say a couple of things. So obviously there's a legal issue, so it's an enormous question, of course, to define the class, what type of child, what type of adults. Are these very rigid classes? And also this question of minority, which is you have the issue of rights from 17 and a half to 18, and then suddenly there's suddenly a huge pivot towards being an adult, and I think that's an enormous gap. I'm afraid I've forgotten what I wanted to say. So, what is going to characterize this transition from someone who's being dominated to being someone who dominates? This is a process. It's a lengthy process psychologically, if you like, to living through these different traumatic experiences and some kind of resistance to some memories. And psychologically, one might be able to define that when you forget is when you become an adult. And what I'd like to add is the following, that the two key ingredients of a social discrimination is alteration, and so the becoming of an other. So someone different from us, and another aspect as well. And I think that there's some kind of transition between these two different aspects, because and some young people might say, I don't like this, but a year before they might have really loved something. So they want to say, I'm no longer this, and I'm no longer interested in this. I'm now part of a different class or a different kind of group. But for example, they might say, I don't like this kind of music because now I belong to a different group. So I'm not sure if that parallel is clear, but that this idea of distancing yourself from something and becoming part of the dominant group.
Moi, je voudrais répondre à cette question.
So, as a sociologist, an unpleasant one if you like, so I'm going to reply with a question if you like,
Je pense que ça fait réfléchir.
because I think it makes us really think. Often we ask, let me give you an example. Recently, what do you think, Gabrielle, of the children's voting rights? Could they have a right to vote from birth, for example?
Je ne sais pas ce que j'en pense du droit.
I don't really know what I truly think about that, but what interests me is that we're always asking for when are we ready? When do we have the skills that we need to do something? But we never really ask. But when do we never say when we wouldn't have them, because we say when should we have the right to vote? 16 years old or 14 years old? But when would you say, when would we withdraw the voting rights from someone? We never hear about that. We never dare to ask that question. We'd never think about taking someone's voting rights away from them. So my answer is some kind of non-answer, if you like. Because by asking this very question, which is something that blindsides us, if you like, this is another matter.
Je me permets simplement d'ajouter que
I'd just like to add, in Geneva, what we see in a quite striking way is we work with social workers and health workers. As Pierre said, that kind of transition to adulthood is a pivotal moment,
extrêmement dangereux.
which is also a very dangerous moment. Through young people who suddenly turn 18 are supposed to be head off into the world, but on the rights and legal framework, there are a number of different directives and possibilities and economic support as well, which either they disappear or they require some wherewithal in order to be able to access these services. So I really just wanted to underscore that aspect of suddenly turning 18 and becoming an adult. Another question? Yes, please.
Oui, bonsoir, merci.
Good evening. Thank you very much for this discussion.
Juste, ce serait bien qu'on garde en tête de ne pas faire.
I think that we shouldn't make the same mistake that we often do, that we speak on behalf of those involved. So where are the children in this round table? Where are the minors? Let's invite them. When we talk about these kind of issues, they should be here. Robin, would you like to come in on that? Let me answer. We did ask whether we should really have minors or not a round table. It wasn't really a rejection or not. I am a minor in a upcoming event in the Reinventing the Future Festival. And there is someone there who's 13 years old, César, this is something that we haven't really done. So it's really something we haven't done before. It's also quite a striking aspect. We weren't able to do so today. So we were able to involve people on the panel, even if they're not currently involved. Sometimes, sorry, I look at you and I think that you're going to take the floor, but I think the microphone has actually gone to someone else. So I'm raising my hopes there. Thank you very much. So when we talk about youth participation, I would like to have seen that we would have a legal expert or a lawyer who would be able to talk about everything linked to Convention on the Rights of Child and Convention on the Rights of Child and Article 12, where we talk about the right of the child to be heard, the right to participate. This would really give us more information than what we're trying to discuss here.
On peut toujours aller lire
We can, looking at some, the Article 12 from the UN, so if we look at participation of children, and you can actually access this on Google, and you can see and to what stage can we involve children, and also when they should be systematically involved and when they can participate. So you can have a look at this on Google. I think Pierre said that the law often leads us to dominate over children. But when you look at domestic laws where they limit the participation of children, and then we ask ourselves, if we talk about a state which is abided to these international conventions, but how could we have laws which should then limit or restrict children's participation? So you can have a look at this document, and this will give you more information. But it's a shame indeed that there wasn't any minors or young people on this panel discussion today, because you'll be able to hear from them what their opinions, what's their point of view, and this might have given us just another angle. So I am undertaking studies on child protection. That is why I wanted to address this point. Thank you. Thank you.
Une question là-bas derrière.
I think there's a question at the back.
Alors, je suis pas du tout à l'aise avec l'oral, donc je vais quand même essayer. C'était peut-être pour pas répondre à monsieur, parce que j'ai pas les prérogatives pour répondre à monsieur, mais qui c'était l'article 12 de la
So Article 12, as the gentleman just spoke to, on the protection of the rights of the child, there's quite an important precision to mention here.
l'enfant qui est capable de
The child who has the right to participate, to express themselves, to give their opinion, what he or she would like for themselves in the future.
la capacité ou non d'un enfant.
Also, we have to ask what determines the capacity or the ability of a child to do so.
On accorde certains droits ou on ne retire certains droits.
Sometimes there are rights or rights are taken away from children, but I do think we just have to ask ourselves. Thank you. In this article, there are different ways of participating, not only through expression. One can express yourself through different images. So non-verbal participation is a form of participation. Also, one of the sociologists spoke about a 12-year-old child. They can also communicate in a non-verbal way. When one reads the Committee on the Rights of the Child, there is more information how these children can participate. And you can participate in different ways. So images, facial expression, and different things that we all have to take into account. So there is a full and true participation of children and young people. It can be individual or collective participation.
Toutes ces questions de Piaget, ça se pose, mais on se demande vraiment à quel moment on accorde.
So at what point do we give this ability to children? Where does that end? Thank you very much for being here this evening. On behalf of the Observatory, I'd like to thank the FIFDH for their partnership, which has made this discussion possible. Thank you very much for all the panelists. Thank you.
Et je crois qu'on peut tous collectivement remercier Luca.
And I think all of us can collectively thank Luca van der Rey for this very moving film that we've seen.
Et merci beaucoup à toi, Kaoutar.
I'd like to thank you, Kaoutar, for moderating the discussion.
À très bientôt, le programme est très riche, on se reverra.
So I'm sure we'll see each other during some other screenings, so thank you very much.